Hello and welcome back to Library of Ruina Ranked Abnormality Edition. In this video, we'll be ranking the abnormalities from HOD's floor. While not as strong as YesOD's floor, HOD still has some pretty incredible pages, so let's get started. In Tier 1, for F tier, we have Surprise Gift. This page gives a buff to a single librarian that gives a giftee status to the first opponent they clash against. If the giftee clashes against a character other than the selected librarian, the gift explodes at a 40% chance, dealing between 2 and 7 damage and inflicting 2 bleed next scene. A new gift can be given once the original giftee dies. This translates to about 2.2 damage and 0.8 bleed each time the enemy clashes with the non-giftee. This page doesn't give any utility or clashing power, and the damage it provides is only mediocre since it'll probably have fewer chances to proc than times the opponent attacks. It's not awful, but it's very underwhelming. In D tier, we have Social Distancing. This page gives a buff to a single librarian, boosting their block dice power by 1 to 2 and making them deal 2 to 7 bonus stagger damage out of deflect. This page's buff is quite solid, but the defensive focus means it's not as strong as an offensive slanted boost. Funnily enough, this page would be a lot stronger on Hakma's floor, but while there is a bit of synergy on HOD's floor, her other tier 1 pages provide stronger effects and keep the page fairly low on the list. Our C tier page is Cocoon. This page gives a buff to a single librarian that makes their non-mass attack dice inflict 1 to 2 paralysis, bind, and fragile next scene on hit, but only if the die max rolled. While somewhat inconsistent, the trigger is extremely powerful and can be built around fairly easily with cards like Raise the Grass or with Funny Prank, which we'll talk about later. The thing holding this page back is that you need to build around it for best effect, and it doesn't provide power boosting, but in general, HOD's tier 1 pages are reasonably strong here, so that's why it only gets C. For B tier, we have Glitter. This page gives a buff to a single librarian, which allures enemies at a 50% chance at the start of each scene, forcing them to target the selected librarian and dealing 2 to 4 bonus damage with attacks. In exchange, the selected librarian gets 1 to 2 power and clashes against allured enemies. This page is somewhat similar to Malkuth's Display of Affection, where you gain 1.5 power when clashing but with a downside, but it's easier to get since it's only a -2 rather than a -3. Messing with your targeting can be a bit annoying, but it's nothing unmanageable. In A tier, we have Axe. This page gives a buff to a single ally, giving their slash dice 1 to 3 bonus power at the cost of taking 2 to 5 stagger damage when slash attacks fail to land. This is a very powerful buff and a very manageable downside. An average of 2 slash power means you're quite likely to win all of your clashes, and losing a couple of them wasn't the end of the world. Obviously, you're going to want to have this on a slash build or else it loses a lot of its power, but with those decks, is a very potent page. And finally, in S tier, we have Look of the Day. This page gives a buff to a single ally that gives them between -2 and +2 dice power depending on which face they have when they start clashing. Of course, for the purposes of this video, this just translates to a permanent +2 power on the tier 1 page. This is one of the strongest tier 1 abnormality pages, giving a very powerful buff with no trade-off other than user patience. I usually end up avoiding this page because of that patience check, but this is one of the main reasons to use HOD's floor in my opinion. Moving on to tier 2 pages, in F tier we have Shyness. This page gives a buff to a single librarian that gives all block dice on pages they use power equal to the number of defensive dice on that page. For example, Emotional Turbulence's block will get 1 power, while Sturdy's defenses will get 2. This page in general is quite weak, despite giving dice power. Building around this page will give your pages a similar but worse boost compared to Look of the Day, since there are only 2 pages with 3 block dice, and otherwise you're often just getting a single power boost on a random block die. Funny Prank is our D tier page. This gives a buff to a single ally that makes the first die of each combat page they play either min or max roll, but if it min rolls, they take 2 to 7 damage. This page escapes F tier off of the back of Manipulator of Odds and Cocoon having synergy with it. By itself, this page on average is just downsides since it doesn't affect your roll average, but makes you take extra damage sometimes. Cocoon triggers more often with Funny Prank, and Manipulator of Odds makes it a 75% likely to roll max roll, which is valuable, but other than that, this page should be avoided. In C tier, we have Meal. This page gives a buff to a single ally that recovers 2 to 4 HP of all allies whenever they hit a staggered enemy, excluding mass attacks. This is a fairly simple sustain page. It will usually do nothing, but when you stagger an enemy, you can often recover 50 or more HP across your entire team, which is very good. It only gets C tier because of its inconsistency, and if you're staggering enemies, then you're less likely to need the sustain. For B tier, we have Friend. This page gives a buff to a librarian that gives one of their pages each scene the Friend status. The status gives the page 2 to 4 power, but if it isn't used within 2 scenes, it exhausts and deals 2 to 7 damage to the librarian. This page gives a very large boost, with the downside of somewhat restricting your options. As long as you keep cycling your pages, it'll feel pretty great, but there is a slight deck building cost, as if you include silver bullet cards or mass attacks in your deck, you might have them taken away from you against your will. Our A tier page is Alertness. This page gives a buff to a librarian, which reduces the power of enemies clashing into them by 1, and upon winning a clash, they inflict 1 bind on fragile next scene at a 50% chance. While dropping enemy power is worse than giving player power, this is still a strong buff that boosts your clashing while inflicting some decent debuffs. This page has a bit of a positive feedback loop, since bind helps set up more clashes by redirecting, and the power reduction helps you win clashes to inflict more status defects. The vulnerability doesn't help with the loop, but enemies getting 4 to 5 vulnerability is pretty strong all on its own. That means that our S tier page is Obsession. This page makes all characters inflict double bleed. A very simple effect, but a very strong one. While normally I don't like pages that just provide damage, Obsession is so busted when built around that I can transcend that. Most enemies don't inflict bleed, but a properly built bleed floor can inflict 10 to 20 bleed on each enemy every scene, so doubling that will make enemies die very quickly, which is the reason HOD's floor is known for insane bleed. For tier 3 pages, I put Loving Family in F tier. This page gives a single ally 6 natal clothing, which gives protection equal to the stacks each scene, but a stack is lost at the end of each scene. This page gives 6, then 5, then 4, and so on protection, but to a single ally. Sure, this makes them quite tanky, but since this is a tier 3 page, you're probably at the tail end of the reception anyway, which usually means that you're either winning, or your librarians are all really low health and this doesn't restore HP. It kind of reminds me of fog effects in Magic, where casting one doesn't really help you, more just delays your inevitable defeat. Next, we have Well-Worn Parasol, which I put in B tier. This page gives a buff to a single ally, which gives them 2 to 3 speed, and when hit, they nullify the damage at a 30% chance and deal stagger damage equal to twice the damage nullified. This is a much better defensive tool than Loving Family. 30% chance to nullify damage is basically the same as 30% damage reduction, and while that's probably worth about 2.5 protection, the extra speed and stagger damage make this page much more relevant than protection in most cases. Finally, in S tier, we have Gooey Waste. This page gives a buff to a single ally that inflicts 1 bind, fragile, bleed, and paralysis to all enemies on clash win, but only twice per scene. Winning 2 clashes is trivial, so basically this page inflicts 10 bind, fragile, bleed, and paralysis, which is an absurd amount of defects every scene. Of course, only 2 of them affect clashing, and 2 are pure damage, but paralysis is really strong and easily makes this the strongest tier 3 page on HOD's floor. Overall, HOD's floor is about average. I have it ranked 6th on my floor rankings, just above Malkuth. In the next video, we'll be rating all of NetZach's abnormality pages. I'll see you soon, and as always, thank you for watching.